The man standing in my parlor told me he was my husband. I had never seen him before in my life. His name was Edmund Harcourt, 42 years old, owner of 3 warehouses on the Mississippi waterfront. A man who wore expensive suits and smiled with teeth that had never known hunger. He stood between my late husband's reading chair and the window that looked out onto Chestnut Street in St. Louis, and he held papers in his hand like they were weapons, which I would learn they were. My name is Grace Adelaide Winters. I am 30 years old. I became a widow 8 weeks ago when my husband Thomas collapsed in his office from what the doctor called a failure of the heart. Thomas was 38. Too young to die, everyone said. Such a tragedy, they whispered at the funeral. Poor Grace, they murmured, as they filed past me in black dresses and manufactured sympathy. What they did not say, what no one said, was that Thomas Winters had been failing long before his heart gave out. Failing at business, failing at sobriety, failing at being a husband to a woman who had stopped expecting anything from him years ago. I did not cry at his funeral. I told myself it was shock. But the truth I did not speak aloud, even in the privacy of my own thoughts, was that I felt something closer to relief. The kind of relief you feel when a long illness finally ends, when the waiting is over and you can at least begin to count the cost. I thought the cost was behind me. I was wrong. Edmund Harcourt came 3 weeks after we buried Thomas. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The maple trees on Chestnut Street were just beginning to turn, that first hint of gold creeping into the green. I remember noticing that as I opened the door, noticing the beauty of it, thinking that maybe I could start to see beautiful things again now that Thomas was gone. Edmund Harcourt was not a beautiful thing. He was tall, well-dressed, with silver threading through dark hair at his temples. Handsome in the way that men with money often are. Groomed, maintained. The kind of handsome that comes from never missing a meal, never worrying about rent, never lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering how you will survive the next month. He introduced himself as Thomas's business partner, said he had come to offer his condolences, said he knew it was difficult to discuss such matters so soon after a loss, but that there were affairs that needed settling. I invited him in because that is what you do when a respectable man comes to your door, speaking in reasonable tones about reasonable things. That was my first mistake. He sat in Thomas's chair, the green velvet one by the window that Thomas had spent his last 5 years drinking in. Edmund crossed his legs, smoothed his trousers, and opened the leather case he had brought with him. I sat across from him on the settee that had belonged to my mother, the only piece of furniture in this house that I had brought from my father's home when I married Thomas. Everything else belonged to the Winters family, the Winters name, Winters debts, that I was only now beginning to understand. Edmund pulled papers from his case, with the care of a surgeon selecting instruments. Contract of debt, he said. Loan agreement. Collateral documentation. He laid them on the small table between us, one by one, like he was dealing cards in a game I had not known we were playing. Thomas owed him $15,000. I heard the number, but it did not land immediately. 15,000. It was too large, too impossible. Thomas had told me the business was struggling. Yes, but he had never mentioned a number like that. Never mentioned Edmund Harcourt at all, beyond the occasional reference to his partner. I looked at the papers. Thomas's signature was at the bottom of each one. His handwriting, which I knew as well as my own. The dates went back 3 years. Some of them I recognized. The winter Thomas said, we needed to economize. We could not afford a new coat for me. The spring, he sold my mother's silver. The summer, he stopped meeting my eyes when he came home late smelling of whiskey, and what I had convinced myself was just failure. He had been borrowing all that time, and I had not known. Edmund watched me read with the patience of a man who had time, who had already won, who was simply waiting for me to understand the shape of my loss. I understand this is difficult, he said when I finally looked up. Thomas was not a dishonest man. He was simply in over his head. The collateral, I said. My voice sounded far away. What did he put up as collateral? Edmund reached for another paper. This one he held for a moment before handing it to me. The house, he said, the furnishings, and certain other considerations. I read the document. The house. Yes. Our address on Chestnut Street, the 2-story brick building that I had scrubbed and maintained and tried to make a home despite Thomas's best efforts to drink it away. The furnishings. Yes. Every stick of furniture, every dish, every curtain. And then, in language so careful it almost hid what it was saying, a clause about inheritance rights, about the transfer of obligations in the event of the primary debtor's death, about how a widow's responsibility to her husband's debts could be. I read the phrase 3 times before I understood it. Could be satisfied through remarriage to the creditor if mutually agreed upon and properly documented. I looked up at Edmund Harcourt. His expression had not changed. Still sympathetic, still patient, still the face of a reasonable man discussing reasonable things. This is not legal, I said. He smiled, not a cruel smile. That would have been easier. This was worse. This was the smile of someone explaining the rules to a child. Judge Whitmore notarized it himself, Edmund said. He and I have known each other 20 years. He reviewed the language personally. Made sure everything was in order. Judge Whitmore. The same judge who had presided over my father's estate when he died. The same judge who had stood at Thomas's funeral and shaken my hand and told me, if I needed anything at all, I should not hesitate to ask. You want me to marry you, I said. I want to resolve this matter in a way that is beneficial to both of us. Edmund said. You would keep the house, keep your position in society, keep your good name, and the debt would be satisfied. He leaned forward slightly. Thomas spoke very highly of you, Grace. May I call you Grace? He said you were a woman of sense, of practicality. He said you understood how the world works. And if I refuse, then I will be forced to execute the terms of the loan. The house will be sold. The furnishings will be sold. Your reputation as a woman who abandoned her husband's obligations will make it very difficult to find employment, or housing, or any kind of future in St. Louis. He said all of this in the same tone he had used to offer his condolences. I have prepared the preliminary paperwork, he continued, reaching into his case again. Of course, you will want time to consider. These decisions should not be rushed. Shall we say 2 weeks? I will return on the 15th of October, and we can finalize everything then. He stood. I remained seated. He placed a card on the table, his name, an address I recognized as one of the finest streets in the city. I am not an unreasonable man, Grace. I know this is a shock. But I think when you have had time to reflect, you will see that this is the best solution for everyone. he left. I sat in my mother's settee and looked at the papers spread across the table, and I did not cry. I had learned years ago that crying did not change anything. Thomas had taught me that. Every time I cried about the drinking, about the money, about the way our life kept shrinking, Thomas would wait until I was done, and then nothing would change. So I stopped crying. I stood up, I gathered the papers, and I began to read. It took me 3 days to go through everything Thomas had left behind. Not the furniture, not the dishes, not the visible artifacts of our 10 years of marriage. I went through the papers, the letters, the ledgers hidden in the back of his desk drawer, the accounts he had kept separate from the household books I maintained. What I found was not a weak man destroyed by circumstances. What I found was a calculating man who had been planning his own escape for a very long time. Thomas had known he was dying. Maybe not the exact day, maybe not the exact hour, but he had known. The doctor had told him a year before that his heart was failing, that he needed to stop drinking, needed to reduce stress, needed to change everything about the way he was living. Thomas had not stopped. He had accelerated. The last loan from Edmund Harcourt had been taken out 6 weeks before Thomas died. There was no business reason for it. No inventory purchased, no rent paid, no legitimate expense. The money had simply disappeared into whatever hole Thomas had been feeding for years. But there was a letter. I found it on the 4th day of my searching, tucked inside a book Thomas kept on his desk. A book about rail investments that he had never once opened in my presence. Inside, folded small and pressed flat, a letter in Thomas's handwriting addressed to Edmund Harcourt, dated 1 month before Thomas died. I sat in Thomas's chair, the green velvet one that still smelled faintly of whiskey and failure, and I read my dead husband's words. Edmund, I cannot repay you. We both know this. The money is gone, and there is no recovering it. But Grace is a good woman, better than I deserved. She is smart, practical, and still young enough to be of value. If I am gone, and I expect I will be soon, you could provide for her in ways I never could. She will resist at first. She has pride, but she is also realistic. If you are patient, if you are kind in your approach, I believe she will see reason. She deserves a better husband than I was. You could be that man. Consider this my final gift to you both. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. Thomas had not been a weak man who failed. Thomas had been a calculating man who had sold his wife to pay his debts and told himself it was kindness. He had not left me a widow. He had left me inventory. I stood up from the green velvet chair, and I felt something change in my chest. Not breaking. Breaking implies that something whole becomes pieces. This was different. This was something false being burned away. Something I had believed about my life, about my marriage, about the man I had tied myself to, turning to ash and revealing what had always been underneath. Anger. Clean, cold, clarifying anger. Thomas had bet that I would choose the easy path. That I would marry Edmund Harcourt to keep my house and my reputation and my comfortable, constrained, controlled life. Edmund was betting the same thing. They were both wrong. I spent the next week making copies. Every document, every ledger entry, every piece of paper that showed what Edmund Harcourt really was. Because while I had been reading Thomas's papers, I had also been reading Edmund's. The loan agreements were fraudulent. The interest rates were illegal. The collateral clauses were written in language designed to trap rather than protect. And underneath all of it, carefully hidden in references and initials and dates that meant nothing to someone who was not looking, I found evidence of something larger. Edmund Harcourt had been stealing from his investors for years, bribing city officials to overlook shipping violations, filing false documentation with the Port Authority, creating phantom expenses, and pocketing the difference. Thomas had known some of it, maybe not all, but enough, and instead of exposing it, Thomas had borrowed more money and gone deeper into Edmund's debt until the only way out was death. And a wife who might be desperate enough to become part of the payment. I made 2 copies of everything. One I sent to William Tate, a lawyer in Chicago who had been a friend of my father's. A man who had written to me after father died and said if I ever needed help, truly needed it, I should not hesitate to contact him. I sent the copies in a package marked personal and confidential. I included a letter explaining everything. And I included one additional instruction. If I do not write to you again before November 30th confirming that I am safe, please deliver these documents to the Chicago Tribune and to the Federal Marshal's office. Do not wait for further instruction. Do not attempt to contact me. Simply act. I mailed it from a post office 3 miles from my house, in a part of the city where no one knew my face. The second copy I kept. And then I began looking for a way out. The advertisements were in the back of the newspaper, a section I had never paid attention to before, because it had never been relevant to my life. But I was looking now, looking for anything that might offer an exit from St. Louis that did not involve marrying my dead husband's creditor. That was where I found the mail-order bride notices. I had heard of such things, of course. Women traveling west to marry men they had never met. It was considered scandalous in some circles, desperate in others, practical in a few. My mother would have been horrified. But my mother had been dead for 8 years, and her opinions had died with her. Most of the advertisements were what you would expect. Men describing the comfort they could offer, the homes they had built, the established lives they were inviting women to join. They promised security, stability, respectability. One advertisement was different. It ran for 3 lines in small print at the bottom of the page. Needed, woman capable of hard work. Life on mountain not easy. Winter harsh. No comforts. Only honesty and hard work required. If you seek this, write to J. Callahan, Harrow's Crossing, Wyoming Territory. I read it 4 times. No promises of comfort. No descriptions of property. No assurances of security. Just honesty and hard work. And a mountain where winter was harsh and comforts were few. A place, in other words, where Edmund Harcourt's reach might not extend. I wrote the letter that night. I did not tell him about Thomas. I did not tell him about the debt, or Edmund, or the reason I needed to disappear. I simply wrote the truth about what I could offer. I am 30 years old. I have been married. I am now widowed. I can read, write, and keep accounts. I can cook adequately and sew competently. I have no romantic expectations. I need a place where my past cannot follow me. If you need help and can offer that, I can offer the work you require. I signed it Grace Adelaide. Not Grace Adelaide Winters, just Grace Adelaide. The first step toward becoming someone else. Someone who was not inventory. Someone who was not for sale. I mailed it the next morning. The reply came 8 days later. The handwriting was rough, unpracticed. The letters formed with obvious care by someone who did not write often. I do not promise anything beyond a roof and honesty. If that is what you need, come to Harrow's Crossing before October 1st. I will be there. J. Callahan. October 1st was 12 days away. Edmund Harcourt had scheduled our meeting to finalize the marriage contract for October 15th. I had 12 days to disappear. I spent them carefully. I sold everything I could sell quietly. My mother's jewelry, piece by piece, to different pawn shops in different parts of the city. The silver Thomas had not already taken, the good dishes, anything small enough to carry and valuable enough to convert to cash. I kept only what I could fit in one traveling case. 3 dresses, undergarments, my mother's Bible, not because I was particularly religious, but because she had written her recipes in the back. Practical things, survival things. I bought a ticket on the Western Stage for Saturday, September 28th. On Friday, September 27th, Edmund Harcourt sent a man to my door. I recognized the type immediately. Not a servant, not a friend. Muscle-dressed in a cheap suit. The kind of man who collected debts when debtors were reluctant to pay. He handed me a card, Edmund's name, a message on the back in Edmund's careful script. Looking forward to our meeting Monday. Please be prepared to sign the initial documents. We can celebrate with dinner afterward. The man waited as if expecting a response. I smiled. The smile I had learned to wear during 10 years of marriage to Thomas. The smile that said I was cooperative, understanding, willing to be managed. Please tell Mr. Harcourt I am looking forward to it as well, I said. The man left. I closed the door. I turned the lock, and I felt my heart hammering in my chest, like something trying to escape a cage. Monday was September 30th, the last Western Stage out of St. Louis. Before that was Sunday morning, September 29th, at 5 a.m. I had less than 48 hours. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, though fear was certainly there, humming under my skin like electricity before a storm. I did not sleep because I was, for the first time, in longer than I could remember, fully awake. I was 30 years old. I had spent the first 20 years of my life being my father's daughter, learning to be quiet and obedient and pleasing. I had spent the next 10 years being Thomas's wife, learning to be even quieter, more obedient, more pleasing, and discovering that no amount of any of it would ever be enough. And now, in the early morning hours of September 28th, 1878, sitting in a house that's about to stop being mine. In a city I was about to leave forever, I realized something. I had never, not once, made a choice that was entirely my own. Every decision had been made with someone else's approval in mind. My father's, Thomas's, society's. Some invisible judge who lived in my head and evaluated everything I did against a standard I had not set and could never meet. I was about to get on a stage heading west to marry a man I had never seen, and it was the first free choice I had ever made. The stage left St. Louis at exactly 5 a.m. on Sunday, September 29th. I was on it. I sat in the back corner wearing the plainest dress I owned. Gray wool, high collar, no ornamentation. My hair pinned tight, no jewelry, nothing that would draw attention. I had learned years ago how to make myself invisible when I needed to be. The other passengers were mostly men. Traders, prospectors, drifters, heading west for reasons they did not share. One other woman older than me, wearing widow's black and clutching a carpet bag like it contained everything she owned. Maybe it did. No one spoke to me. I did not speak to them. I watched St. Louis disappear through the window as the sun rose over the Mississippi. The city where I had been born, where I had married, where I had almost been sold. I did not look back, not once. The journey took 11 days. We traveled through Missouri, across Kansas into Colorado. The landscape changed outside the window. Trees to prairie, to mountains, green to gold, to the first hints of white on distant peaks. I spent the days watching, learning, paying attention to the way people moved through this country, the way they talked, the way they carried themselves. At night, when we stopped at rough stations or rougher towns, I heard men talking about the West, about women, about the mail-order brides some of them had sent for or heard about. Most of them are running from something. One man said over cards and whiskey in a station outside of Junction City. Either that, or they are too ugly to find a husband back east. His companions laughed. I lay in the narrow bed in the room I was sharing with 2 other women and listened to them laugh and thought about Thomas's letter, hidden in my case, about Edmund Harcourt's smile, about the judge who had signed papers that made it legal to trade a woman for a debt. Let them think I was running. Let them think I was desperate. Let them think whatever they wanted. I was not running towards something. I was walking away from everything I had been taught to accept. And that, I was learning, was a different thing entirely. We reached Harrow's Crossing on the morning of October 1st. The town was smaller than I had imagined. One main street, perhaps 40 or 50 buildings, a few stores, a saloon, a church that looked like it was losing an argument with gravity. Mountains, rising behind everything, huge and indifferent, still wearing summer green at their bases, but showing the first gold at their edges. And people. People everywhere. Sapapa because apparently nothing happened in Harrow's Crossing. Interesting enough to keep anyone from stopping what they were doing. When a stage rolled in, I climbed down from the wagon, my legs stiff from days of travel, my dress dusty, my hair escaping its pins despite my best efforts. The townspeople watched. I felt their eyes before I had taken 3 steps. Measuring eyes, judging eyes. The kind of eyes I had lived with all my life. A man pushed to the front of the small crowd, gap-toothed, red-faced, built like a scarecrow stuffed with malice. He looked at me and then looked at the men around him and grinned. "Callahan's going to regret that ad," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Look at her. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Easy, comfortable laughter. The kind that people share when they have known each other long enough to enjoy a mutual cruelty. I stood very still. I had learned this too. How to stand when people laughed, how to keep my face smooth, how to let the sound roll past me without showing that it landed. I looked past the gap-toothed man, past the laughing crowd, searching for someone who might be Jay Callahan. And I found him. He stood apart from the others, separate from them the way a rock stands separate from water that flows around it. Tall, maybe 6'2", broad shoulders under a canvas coat that had seen hard use, dark brown hair, longer than was fashionable, and eyes, strange eyes, the color of amber in sunlight, almost gold. I had never seen eyes that color before. He had a scar running from his right temple down his cheek. Not fresh, years old, faded to silver. He was holding his hat in his hands. That was what I noticed most. He had taken his hat off when the stage arrived. No one had asked him to. He had simply done it. The only man in Harrow's Crossing who had. I met those amber eyes across 20 feet of dust and morning sun, and I said, in a voice that came out steadier than I had any right to expect, "Grace Adelaide?" He looked at me for a long moment. Long enough that I wondered if he was going to turn around and walk away. Long enough that I had time to think about the coins in my pocket and whether they would be enough to buy a run back to St. Louis. If this man took one look at me and decided I was not what he needed, then he said, yes. His voice was low, roughened by disuse or weather, or something else I could not identify. "Are you Jonas Callahan?" I asked. "I am." He moved forward through the crowd. They parted for him without being asked. I noticed that. Noticed the way they stepped aside. Not fear exactly, but respect. Or maybe wariness. Jonas stopped in front of me. Up close, he was even taller than I had thought. I am not a small woman, but I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "Have you eaten?" he asked. The question surprised me. Not, "Welcome to Harrow's Crossing." Not, "Let me see if you are suitable," just, "Have you eaten?" "Yesterday," I said. He nodded once. "Store first, then we talk." He walked past me to the wagon and lifted my tospe like it weighed nothing. The crowd was still watching, still waiting for something interesting to happen. Jonas ignored them completely. He started toward a building with a sign that read General Store. I followed. Behind me, I heard the gap-toothed man say something else. Something about mail order mistakes. More laughter. I kept walking. I had come 11 days to reach this place. I was not going to let the first 5 minutes break me. Inside the store, it smelled like coffee and sawdust and leather. A broad man with a graying beard stood behind the counter, and his eyes went wide when I walked in behind Jonas. The man opened his mouth. Jonas cut him off with a look. The man closed his mouth. Jonas set my case by the door and pointed to a chair near a cold stove. "Sit," he said, "before you fall." I wanted to argue, wanted to prove I was strong enough to keep standing. But my legs were shaking, and my vision was starting to gray at the edges, and so I sat. Jonas moved through the store with efficient purpose. He spoke quietly to the store owner. 2 minutes later, a plate appeared on the table beside me. Biscuits, dried meat, half a jar of preserves. I ate. Jonas continued moving through the store, pulling supplies from shelves. Flour, salt, oil, coffee. The store owner watched us both with the barely concealed fascination of a man who would be telling this story for weeks. When I finished eating, Jonas came and stood in front of me. He did not sit. Just stood, arms crossed, studying me with those strange amber eyes. "You understand what you agreed to?" he asked. "I answered a letter," I said. The letter said, "You needed someone capable of hard work who was not afraid of mountains." "You ever seen mountains before today?" I paused. In paintings. Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement, not quite something else. "I have a homestead 6 miles up that trail," he said. "Solid cabin. Good water, but it is hard country. Snow comes in October sometimes. Once it comes, you are in until March. No doctor, no neighbors close. No help if something goes wrong." He held up his right hand. The 2 smallest fingers were slightly crooked, healed wrong. "Last winter, I nearly lost these to frostbite, pulling a calf in a blizzard. I cannot run that place alone anymore. That is why I placed the ad." "I understand," I said. "Do you?" It was not really a question. I stood up because I was not going to have this conversation sitting down. "Mr. Callahan," I said, "I do not know everything about mountains. I do not know how to shoot, or skin a deer, or predict a blizzard. I know I do not. But I can read, I can write, I can keep accounts. I can bake bread that will not poison a person. I can sew, and I will learn everything else. Whatever you need me to learn, I will learn it. I met his eyes. I am not going back to St. Louis. You can decide right now whether I go to your mountain or I find some other roof in this town. But I am not getting back on that stage. Jonas looked at me for a long time. Then he reached over and picked up my case. Trail is 6 miles, he said. Steep. You fall behind, I am not carrying you. I did not ask you to. Fine, fine, he walked out. I followed. Outside, the crowd had not dispersed. The gap-toothed man was still there, holding a rag to his cheek, looking at me with an expression that had shifted from mockery to something more careful. A woman near the mercantile door, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, wearing a flour sack apron, looked at me as I passed. Lord help her, the woman said. Just loud enough. Poor thing. I stopped, turned, looked at her directly. Something in my face must have shown, because the woman pulled back slightly. Ma'am, I said, I have been called poor thing my entire life, by people who never once thought to ask what I was capable of. I would appreciate if Harrow's Crossing did not start the same way. The woman blinked, did not answer. But her chin came up in something that might, eventually, turn into respect. Jonas was waiting at the edge of town. He did not comment, did not smile, did not acknowledge what had just happened. He just turned and started up the trail, and I followed him up the mountain toward whatever came next. The first mile was gentle enough that I thought I might actually survive this. The trail was wide, the grade manageable, the September air still warm enough to be almost pleasant. I kept pace with Jonas without effort, and I let myself look at the aspens turning gold on the hillside, let myself think that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be all right. Then the trail turned. It went up, not gradually, not with any considerations for legs that had spent 11 days sitting in a wagon. It went up sharply, brutally, switching back on itself against a rock face, the path narrowing until it was barely wide enough for the mule Jonas was leading. The air thinned. My lungs started working twice as hard for half as much oxygen. My legs, which had already been complaining, began to argue with me in ways I could not ignore. Jonas moved up that trail, like he had been born to it. Easy, unhurried, his boots finding purchase on loose rock without hesitation. The mule, a gray animal with the expression of someone who had given up on the world entirely, matched his pace without complaint. He did not look back for the first quarter mile. When he did, I was 40 yards behind him. Stopped, both hands on my knees, pulling air into my lungs like it was something I had to fight for. Jonas came back down the trail. He did not say anything immediately, just stopped. Waited. I am fine, I said before he could speak. You are not fine. I will be. Give me a moment. We have 5 miles left and about 3 hours of daylight. I know. I straightened. My vision went gray at the edges for a moment, then cleared. I am ready. You sure? Mr. Callahan, I said. If you ask me that question one more time, I am going to sit down on this trail and not move out of spite. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. Almost a smile, but not quite. He turned and started back up without another word. I followed, and it went like that for the next 2 miles, Jonas moving steady, me grinding forward through air that felt like wet wool pressed over my face, my chest burning, my legs shaking, my pride the only thing keeping my feet moving. I did not stop again. I would not give myself permission to stop again. At a creek crossing about 3 miles up, Jonas paused to let the mule drink. I caught up and stood at the water's edge, looking at the cold, clear water moving over rocks, and I thought I had never wanted anything in my life as badly as I wanted to sit down in that creek and let it carry me away. I did not sit. I bent and splashed water on my face and the back of my neck, cupped my hands and drank. The water was so cold it made my teeth ache. I stood back up. "You can rest," Jonas said. 5 minutes will not kill us. I thought we were losing daylight. 5 minutes will not kill us, he repeated. I sat on a boulder. My entire body seemed to exhale. Every muscle I had been holding tight for the last 3 miles went loose all at once. Jonas stood across the creek from me, looking up at the mountains above us with the comfortable ease of a man who had made his peace with this landscape a long time ago. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, just present. "Why do you live up here?" I asked. He glanced at me. "Fewer people. And that is a good thing?" "Generally. But you sent for one." "I sent for help," he said. "There is a difference. I considered that." "How many women answered your letter?" He looked at me then, his amber eyes catching the afternoon light in a way that made them look almost metallic. "One," he said. I had not expected that. Only one? Only one. I turned that information over in my mind. Was the letter not very good? The letter was honest. Most people do not want honest. They want promises. I looked at the water moving past. Thought about the letter I had written to him, sitting at the small desk in the boarding house, where I had spent Thomas's final months. I had written it fast and plain and true, because I had not had time for anything else, and because I had figured a man on a mountain who said he needed help was not looking for poetry. "I cannot promise I will not struggle," I said. "I already have, and we are only 3 miles in, I know. But I can promise I will not quit." Jonas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is the only promise that matters up here." He stood, took the mule's lead. We should keep moving. The last 3 miles were the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. The trail went steep and stayed steep. My legs stopped shaking and went numb, which was almost worse, because I could not tell anymore if they were holding me correctly. My breath came in short, ragged pulls that never felt like enough. Jonas stopped more often as the afternoon wore on. He did not say he was stopping for me. He said he needed to check the mule's footing, or look at the trail ahead, or adjust the load on the animal's back. I did not call him on it. I used every stop to pull air back into my body and tell myself the same thing I had been telling myself since St. Louis. "You are not going back. You are not going back. You are not going back." The sun was touching the western peaks when the cabin appeared. It sat in a small clearing, with its back against a granite cliff, and its face toward the mountains, falling away below, built from timber that had been notched and fitted with obvious care. Stone chimney, pitched roof, a stack of firewood under the eaves that told me Jonas had been preparing for winter already. I stood at the edge of the clearing and just breathed. My legs were trembling. Sweat had dried cold on my skin. I was aware that I probably looked like something that had been dragged behind the wagon rather than carried in it. "This is it," Jonas said. "It is good," I said. He looked at me sideways. "I mean it," I said. "It is solid. You built it to last." I paused. "Did you build of it?" "Neighbor helped with the roof." "You have neighbors?" "One. 5 miles east. Pete Marlowe and his wife Clara. Good people." He started toward the door. Come on, I will show you inside. The interior was one room, smaller than I had imagined. It smelled like wood smoke and old leather, and something underneath that I would later identify as the particular smell of a man who lives alone and has forgotten that other people exist. A table, 2 chairs, a cook stove. Shelves with supplies stacked careful and organized in a way that told me Jonas thought about survival as a daily practice rather than an emergency. A narrow bed against the east wall, and in the far corner a rope frame bed. No mattress, just rope strung tight, 2 blankets folded on top of it. That is yours, Jonas said, nodding toward the rope frame. There is straw in the lean-to. You will need to stuff a tick. I looked at the rope frame, looked at the distance between it and Jonas's bed. The careful, respectful distance of a man who understood what this arrangement was and what it was not. All right, I said. Creek is out back for water. Outhouse is east about 30 yards. He was hanging his coat on a peg by the door. Something about the ordinary domesticity of it, the simple fact of a man hanging up his coat in his own home at the end of a day, made my throat go tight in a way I had not expected. Rules are simple, he said. You do your share, I do mine. You need something, ask. You have a problem, say so. I do not have patience for pretending things are fine when they are not. Neither do I said. He looked at me. Good. I set my case on the table and began unpacking. My hands were steadier than I expected. Mr. Callahan, I said without looking up, I need to tell you something. Go ahead. I stopped, turned to face him. Because this part I was going to say to his face. There is a man in St. Louis. His name is Edmund Harcourt. He was my late husband's business partner. I paused. My husband died 2 months ago and left debts that Harcourt claims are mine in to settle. He has been pressing the matter. Jonas's expression did not change. Pressing how? He came to my home 3 weeks after the funeral. He had papers, legal documents. He said my husband had used me as collateral for a loan, that I could either marry him to satisfy the debt, or he would take everything I owned and destroy my reputation. Looked at my hands, looked back at Jonas. I refused. I spent 2 weeks going through my husband's papers. I found evidence that Harcourt has been committing fraud for years. Bribery, false documentation, theft from investors. I made copies. I sent them to a lawyer in Chicago with instructions to make them public if I do not confirm I am safe by the end of November. I took a breath. I do not know if he will look for me here. I do not know if he knows where I am. But I thought you should know. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. He looked at me with those unreadable amber eyes. Then he said, Does he know your name, my married name, Winters? Not the name I used to answer your letter. Good. He turned toward the stove. I will start the fire. You should eat something real before you fall over. I stared at him. That is all you are going to say? What else is there to say? You told me. I heard you. If he comes, we will deal with it. Right now you need food and sleep. He crouched at the stove and began laying kindling. You walked 6 miles up a mountain on no sleep and an empty stomach, and you did not quit. Whatever is following you, Grace Winters, it has not caught you yet. I stood there in the doorway of that small cabin in the last light of a September day that felt like it had lasted 100 years, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not safety exactly, not hope exactly, but the first hint of solid ground after a very long time of nothing but open water. I turned and went to the rope frame bed and began unfolding the blankets. Jonas started the fire, and outside the mountains went dark and the temperature dropped, and the first stars appeared over Wyoming like scattered nails in a blackboard sky. The first week nearly destroyed me. Not the mountain, not the cold, not even the altitude that still made my lungs work too hard for too little air. It was the work. I burned the cornbread on the first morning, not slightly burned. Black on the bottom, raw in the middle, filling the cabin with smoke thick enough that Jonas had to open the door and stand in the cold air for 10 minutes without saying a word about it. I scraped the pan into the ash bucket and started over. Burned the second batch less severely and put it on the table without comment. Jonas ate it. Did not say it was good. Did not say it was bad. Just ate it and went outside to check on the mule. I sat alone at the table and pressed my hands flat against the wood and breathed. I could do this. I had to be able to do this. By the third day, I had managed bread that was edible. Coffee that was not quite right but was not wrong. Salt pork cooked through without being charred. Small victories that felt enormous, because everything on this mountain was harder than it looked. The water bucket was heavier than I expected, and the path to the creek was uneven. And I spilled more than I carried the first 2 mornings, soaking my skirts in cold water and arriving back at the cabin, half empty and furious at myself. The firewood was difficult to stack correctly. The cook stove had a temperament I had not yet learned to manage. Too much air through the damper, and it ran hot and scorched everything. Too little, and the fire sulked and died while I was not watching. Jonas corrected me once on the damper. 1 sentence. Flat and without judgment. Turn it a quarter to the left. Then he went back to what he was doing. I turned it a quarter to the left and did not ask him to explain further. Just filed it away with everything else I was learning, hour by hour, day by day, in the manner of someone who understood that ignorance was only a problem if you let it stay ignorant. On the 4th day, I dropped a full pot of bean soup. It hit the floor and exploded. Ceramic shards and beans and hot liquid across the key planks, across my boots, across the hem of my dress. I stood very still in the middle of the mess and felt something crack loose in my chest. Some piece of composure I had been holding rigid for days. For a moment, I was absolutely certain I was going to cry. I did not cry. I got down on my knees and started picking up the pieces. Stop! Jonas's voice came from behind me. I heard him move, heard him crouch down beside me. You are cutting your hands. I am fine, Grace. I said I am fine. I kept picking up ceramic shards. The sharp edges were in fact cutting my fingers. Small, shallow cuts that stung and bled, and I did not care even slightly. I just need to clean it up and start over. Let me help. I stopped, sat back on my heels, looked at him, this quiet man with his amber eyes and his careful distance, crouched beside me in his own kitchen. I do not need you to clean up my mess, I said, more sharply than I intended. It is my floor, he said mildly. I almost laughed. It came out wrong, somewhere between a laugh and something else. I pressed the back of my wrist to my mouth and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Jonas waited. He had a quality I was beginning to recognize. A patience that was not passive, was not indifference, was something more like stillness. He simply waited, and he did not fill the silence with words that would make it worse. I want to do one thing right, I said finally, my voice steadier. Just one thing on my own, without burning it or dropping it or making a mess of it. "You made good bread this morning." I looked at him. It was lopsided. It was bread. 3 days ago it was charcoal. That is improvement. I looked at the ruined soup on the floor. It does not feel like improvement. It never does from the inside. He picked up a large ceramic shard and set it in the ash bucket. "You are rushing, trying to learn 6 months of mountain living in 4 days. I do not have 6 months. Winter is coming. Winter is not here yet." He handed me a rag, nodded at my bleeding fingers. "Wrap those. Then we start the soup again. I will show you how I set the fire so the stove holds temperature steady." I wrapped my fingers without arguing. We cleaned the floor together in silence. And then Jonas showed me how to set the stove. Not just the damper. The placement of the wood. The way to bank it so it breathed right. He did not treat it like a lesson. Just did it and talked through it as he went. Matter of fact. No implication that I should already know. I listened to every word and stored it away. The second batch of soup was better. I knew it before I tasted it. I could feel the difference in the way the stove held heat. Steady and even. The way the beans softened properly, instead of sitting hard in water that never quite got hot enough. When Jonas tasted it that evening, he said, "That is decent." "Decent?" I repeated. "From me right now, decent is good." I looked at him across the table. "You are not a man who gives compliments easily." "No. Is that a warning or an explanation?" He thought about it. "Both, I reckon." I ate my soup. Outside, the wind had picked up and the cabin walls held it out with the solid confidence of good construction. I thought about Edmund Harcourt in St. Louis. Thought about whether he had gone to my house yet, whether he had found it empty, whether he was looking for me, or whether he had simply moved on to the next woman desperate enough to consider his offer. "You are thinking about him," Jonas said. I looked up. "How do you know?" "Your face goes different, harder, like something is pressing on it from the inside." I set down my spoon. "Does it bother you that I am not uncomplicated?" "Never expected uncomplicated." He poured himself more coffee from the pot on the stove. "Uncomplicated does not answer a letter like yours." "What do you mean?" "Your letter." He sat back down. "Most women who answer these ads write what they think a man wants to hear. They talk about being good cooks, good housekeepers, willing to work. Fine. But you wrote about what you were willing to learn. Said you did not know much about frontier life, but you were willing to do whatever it took. Said you were not looking for comfort, just for a chance to be useful." He looked at his coffee. "That is different. That is somebody who is running out of options and knows it and is honest about it." "Does that bother you?" I asked. "That I was running? Depends on what you were running from. I told you about Harcourt. Part of it." He looked at me steadily. "There is more." I met his gaze and did not look away. My husband was a weak man. Brilliant in some ways. Weak in others. He borrowed money from Harcourt for years to cover losses, and Harcourt let him because a man in debt is a man you own. When my husband died, Harcourt came to me within 2 weeks. I paused. He did not come to offer condolences. Jonas did not speak. He told me I could either agree to marry him, which would settle the debts and keep what was left of the business, or he would pursue everything through the courts, and I would be left with nothing. I looked at my hands, Oz. I told him I needed time to think. What I actually did was spend 2 weeks going through my husband's papers looking for something I could use. And I found it. Harcourt had been stealing from the business for years, skimming from accounts, bribing a city official, filing false documents with investors. I looked up. I took everything I found, made copies, and I ran. Where are the copies now? Hidden. Not here. Somewhere safe with someone I trust. I paused. If I do not send word by the end of November that I am alive and safe, those documents go to a lawyer in Chicago and a newspaper in Philadelphia. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You planned this. I had 2 weeks. That is not strategy. You were terrified." I was terrified, I said. I am still terrified. But terror and strategy are not mutually exclusive. He looked at me with something in his expression I could not name yet. Not admiration exactly, though it was adjacent to that. More like recalibration. Like he was adjusting some internal measurement of me and finding the new number higher than the old one. "He will come," Jonas said. "I know. Maybe not this winter. Maybe not until spring. But a man like that, with money and connections, and a legal grievance he believes in, he will come." "I know," I said again. "I have been trying to figure out how to tell you. That, without you putting me back on that wagon." "I told you I am not putting you back on that wagon." His voice was flat and final. "But when he comes, and he will come, I need to know what we are dealing with, everything. Not parts of it. Everything. All right, not tonight. You are exhausted." He stood, took his plate to the dry sink, but soon. I nodded. I sat at the table a moment longer after he moved away. Something loosened in my chest. Some knot I had been carrying so long, I had stopped noticing its weight. I had not told anyone the full truth of it since I had left St. Louis. Not because I was ashamed, but because I had not trusted anyone enough to hand them that information and not have it used against me. Jonas Callahan. This silent mountain man who had corrected my damper setting and helped me clean up bean soup and eaten my bad bread without complaint. I had just handed him the map to my most dangerous secret, and he had looked at it and said, "When he comes, we will deal with it. We, not you, we." I went to bed that night and lay on my straw tick listening to the wind against the cabin walls, and thought about that word for a long time before I slept. On the 10th morning, Jonas handed me his rifle. I looked at it. "I do not know how to shoot." "I know. That is why I am handing it to you." He nodded toward a stand of trees at the edge of the clearing. "See that white mark on the big pine? Aim for that." I took the rifle. It was heavier than it looked, and the weight of it sat wrong in my hands for a moment. Unfamiliar and slightly frightening. I positioned it against my shoulder, the way I had seen it done in illustrations, which was apparently not the right way, because Jonas stepped up beside me and adjusted my grip. "Hands here. Weight forward. Lean into it." His voice was completely matter-of-fact, no different than when he had shown me the damper. I pulled the trigger. The recoil knocked me back a full step, and the shot went so far wide, I could not tell where it had gone. Again, Jonas said, "I missed by a mile. You will miss by slightly less a mile the next time." Again, I fired again. Missed. He corrected my grip. I fired again. Missed. But I could see where the shot had gone now. High and to the left. He told me why. I was pulling instead of squeezing. Anticipating the recoil and flinching before the hammer dropped, I made myself not flinch. I squeezed instead of pulled. On the 8th shot, I hit the tree. Not the mark. Just the tree. But Jonas said, "Better," with enough certainty in his voice that I believed him. "Why does this matter?" I asked, reloading. "You are here." "I am not always here," he said. "Trapline runs 3 miles east." Hunting takes me out half the day sometimes. And when spring comes, I go down to Harrow's Crossing for supplies. Takes me 2 days round trip. He looked at me steadily. You need to be able to handle yourself when I am not here. Not because I plan to leave you in danger, because danger does not check my schedule. I looked at the rifle in my hands. Thought about Edmund Harcourt. About the men he might send. About being alone on this mountain with no way to protect myself. I raised the rifle and fired again. Hit the mark. Dead center. Jonas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do that 9 more times." I did. Hit it 6 out of 9. My shoulder was a deep aching bruise from the recoil, and my hands were shaking by the end of it. But I hit 6 out of 9, and Jonas looked at the tree and then at me and said, "You have a good eye. Better than most men I have taught." "I have motivation," I said. "I know." That evening we sat by the fire, and the conversation came easier than it had before. Easier than I would have predicted 2 weeks ago, when we had eaten our first silent meals together. Jonas talked about the mountain in winter. Practical things. What to expect. How bad it could get. What you did when a storm came in fast and you had not finished your preparations. I listened and asked questions and stored every answer carefully. "How long have you been up here alone?" I asked. 5 years. That is a long time, is it? "Without anyone," I said. "Yes, that is a long time." He was quiet for a moment, carving something small from a piece of pine. Had a partner the first year. Pete Marlowe. The neighbor I mentioned. Good man. His wife Clara came out the second spring. Good woman. They are company when I want company. He shaved a thin curl from the wood, but most of the time I did not want company. What changed? He did not answer immediately. Turned the carved piece in his hands. Then he said, "The work got bigger than one person." "That is all?" He was quiet again. Longer this time. I am not built for being around people all the time. Never have been. But quiet and alone, those are not the same thing. I got tired of the second one. I looked at my sewing. A tear in my work skirt I was repairing with stitches small and tight. "I know the difference," I said quietly. "I spent 10 years in a house with another person, and I was the most alone I have ever been." Jonas looked at me. He did not ask what I meant. I thought he probably understood. We sat in silence for a while. The fire burning steady. The wind outside beginning to carry the first edge of something colder than September had been. My needle moved through the fabric. Jonas's knife moved through the wood. And it was, I realized slowly, comfortable, not forced, not performed. Simply 2 people being in the same space without it costing anything. "Grace," Jonas said, his quiet. I looked up. "Whatever Harcourt thinks he owns," he said, looking at the fire rather than at me, "he is wrong. I do not know the details yet, but I know that much. No man owns a woman. Not by law, not by debt, not by any paper he files with any judge he has paid for." He looked at me then, direct and clear. "Not up here." I held his gaze. Felt the familiar sting at the back of my eyes, and refused it the way I had been refusing it for months. "You barely know me," I said. "I know enough." "How?" He looked back at the fire. "A woman who has been owned knows how to make herself small, how to take up less space, make less sound, ask for less. You do none of those things." He turned the carved piece in his hands once more. "Whatever he told you that you were, he was wrong about that too." I pressed my lips together hard, looked down at my sewing. My hands were still for a moment, and I let them be still. Let myself feel the full weight of what he had just said. Let it settle somewhere, It could do some good. Thank you, I said quietly. Do not thank me. Just keep getting better with that rifle. I almost smiled. Yes, Mr. Callahan. Jonas, he said, still watching the fire. Jonas, I said. He nodded once. Like that settled something. And maybe it did. October came in cold and fast the way Jonas had warned it would. The first snow fell on a Tuesday morning, light and quiet. Barely an inch by afternoon. I stood in the doorway and watched it come down and felt something I had not expected. Not fear, not dread, but a kind of fierce satisfaction. The way you feel when you have been training for a fight and the opponent finally shows up. I knew how to bank the fire now. Knew how to pack the door gaps with the rags I had cut and sewn specifically for that purpose. Knew where the emergency stores were, how long they would last, what order to use them in. I was not the woman who had climbed this mountain 6 weeks ago, with paintings of mountains in her head and terror in her chest. I was something else now. I was still figuring out what. First one is always gentle, Jonas said from behind me. He was pulling on his coat, heading out to check the animals. Do not let it fool you. I am not fooled, I said. He looked at me sideways, something brief and warm moving through his expression. Then he went out into the snow, and I went back to the stove. The real snow came 3 weeks later. I woke in the night to a sound I had never heard before. A deep, sustained roar that I lay in my bed. For a full 30 seconds trying to identify, but before I understood it was wind. Wind at a scale I had no previous reference for. Wind that hit the cabin walls like something alive and angry. Wind that found every small gap and screamed through it. I sat up. The cabin was dark except for the red glow at the stove's damper. I could feel the cold already pushing through. Grace, Jonas's voice came low and alert. He was already up, already moving. Get dressed. Full layers now. I dressed fast. Added the heavy wool overskirt I had made from a blanket I had cut apart and resewn. Pulled on both pairs of stockings, my boots, my coat. By the time I was done, Jonas had the fire built up high and was pulling rope from the peg by the door. What is the rope for? I asked. We string a line from the door to the lean-to and one to the outhouse. You lose your way in a whiteout, you can lose it 10 feet from the door. People die that way. He tied one end to the doorframe. Looked at me. You go outside for anything, you hold the rope. You do not let go. You understand? I understand. Say it back to me. I hold the rope. I do not let go. He nodded, went out to run the lines. I stood at the door and watched his lantern bob in the white chaos beyond the cabin walls. I held my breath the entire time he was out there, which surprised me. I did not examine it too closely. We spent the next 2 days hunkered down while the storm hammered at us continuously. And I learned something new about Jonas Callahan in those 2 days. I learned that he was not a man who fell apart under pressure. He was, if anything, calmer in a crisis than he was on ordinary days. He checked the roof, checked the chimney, rationed our firewood with mathematical precision, and when I started to feel the walls moving in on me, the cabin shrinking with every hour, he did not tell me I was being foolish. He said, "Tell me about St. Louis. What street did you live on?" I looked at him, surprised. Chestnut Street, a boarding house. Before that, the house I shared with Thomas. What was the boarding house like? Small, clean. The landlady was a widow named Mrs. Falk. She had a garden in the back, which was remarkable for that neighborhood. She grew tomatoes and she would bring them up to tenants in the summer, still warm from the sun. I paused. I have not thought about that in months. Keep going. So I talked, and Jonas listened, and the walls stopped moving in. I told him about St. Louis, about the wide, muddy river, about the market on Saturday mornings, about the particular sound the city made at night that was so different from the sound this mountain made. And somewhere in the talking, I stopped being afraid of the storm and started being something else instead. Present, grounded here. When I finished, I said, "Your turn." "My turn what? Tell me something. Anything." I looked at him across the fire. "I showed you mine." Then he said, "I grew up in Ohio, small town, nothing remarkable. My father was a blacksmith. Good man, quiet, not much for talking." A pause. "I used to think that was a flaw. Now I think it was just his nature, and I spent a lot of unnecessary years being irritated at him for it." "What changed your mind?" "Coming up here, spending time with nobody but myself." He looked at the fire. "Quiet people are not empty. They are just careful with words. They do not spend them on things that do not matter." "Your father," I said. "Is he gone?" 8 years now. I am sorry. Do not be. He had a good life. Did work he was proud of. Died at home. Something shifted in his jaw. Better ending than a lot of men get." "Did you come here after he died?" "After the war," he said. "Came back from the war, and Ohio felt too small. Too loud in the wrong ways. Men pretending things were the same as they had been, and they were not. They never were going to be." He turned the mug in his hands. "Came west, worked cattle for 2 years. Then I found this mountain, and I stopped looking. I studied his face in the firelight, the clean, hard line of his jaw. The way his eyes went distant when he was thinking about something difficult. The small muscle that tightened at his temple when he was keeping something back. I had learned to read him the way I had learned to read the stove. By close attention over time. "You said you were a marshal," I said carefully, "in Denver." He looked at me. The fire popped and sent a brief wash of orange light across his face. "I was." I waited. He set down his mug. There was a man, outlaw, wanted for killing 2 deputies in Colorado Springs. We tracked him to a house outside Denver. Little place, 1 room. He was inside with his family. Jonas's voice went flat. We called for him to come out. He refused, started shooting through the door. We returned fire. The shooting stopped. I thought we had him. He paused. I heard someone inside scream. Sounded like he was hurting them. His wife and daughter were in there. 7 years old, the girl. I made the call to go in. Another pause. Longer. I kicked the door, saw movement, fired. 3 shots. Center mass. His hands were still on the table, completely still. It was not him. It was his wife. She had been trying to bar the door from the inside. Trying to keep us out because she knew if we came in, her husband would use them as shields. I stopped breathing. She died before the doctor arrived. The little girl watched the whole thing. Watched me shoot her mother. Watched her bleed out on the floor. We found the outlaw hiding under the bed. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. Jonas sat completely motionless. They ruled it justified. Said I had no way of knowing. Said it was a tragedy but not a crime. The marshal offered to keep me on. Said these things happen in the line of duty. He looked at me then. But that girl will never have a mother because I made a decision in 3 seconds that I cannot take back. Justified or not, I killed an innocent woman. That does not change because everyone agreed it was an accident. Why did you tell me? I asked quietly. Because you told me about your husband. About Harcourt. About the things you are running from. He picked up his mug again, but did not drink. I wanted you to know what you are trusting. I am not a good man who made one mistake. I am a man who killed someone who did not deserve to die. And I will live with that until the day I die. That is who I am. I looked at this man across the fire from me. This man who had just handed me the worst thing about himself, without figuration or excuse. Jonas, I said, you are not what you did in your worst moment. You are what you do with all the moments after. He did not answer. But something in his expression shifted. Just slightly, like a door opening a crack. The storm broke on the third morning. The world outside was white and absolute and beautiful in a way that required a moment of stillness to take in. I stood at the door and took it. Then I picked up my shovel and got to work. We dug out together for most of the day. Jonas handled the lean-to and the woodpile. I cleared the path one between the cabin door and the outhouse. Then the path to the creek. Then helped Jonas dig out the side of the lean, to where the snow had drifted 5 feet up the wall. The cold was serious now, not painful exactly, but uncompromising. The kind of cold that did not threaten, just informed you of the terms. I worked through it. By the time we were done, the low sun was already sliding behind the western peaks. Inside, Jonas built the fire back up, while I changed into dry clothes, behind the blanket I had strung between my corner and the rest of the room for privacy. When I came out, he handed me a cup of coffee laced with a measure of whiskey that I could smell before I tasted it. "Drink it," he said. "You are still cold." I drank it. It went through me like a lit match, and the shivering I had not fully acknowledged I was doing began to ease. I sat close to the fire. After a moment, Jonas sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders were nearly touching. I did not move away, neither did he, and it was the most natural thing that had happened between us yet, because neither of us had planned it. "How many more of those?" I asked. "Meaning the storms." "A dozen. Maybe more, some worse, some better. January is the worst month. February comes and it is still bad, but you can feel the back of it breaking. March is a lie. It will fool you 3 times with warmth before it actually means it. How do you stand it? Year after year? Because spring is real," he said simply. "Everything gets real when you have earned it." I thought about that, thought about what real felt like. Not comfortable, not easy, but genuine. Thought about the satisfaction I had felt when I had hit that pine mark with the rifle, when the bread had come out right, when I had hauled the full water bucket all the way back without losing a drop. Small things. "Jonas," I said. When Harcourt comes," I said. Stopped. Started again. "I need you to understand something about him. He is not a man who uses his fists. He uses lawyers and judges and the appearance of legitimacy. He will come with papers, not guns. He will come with a story that makes him the wronged party and me the criminal." I paused. "The most dangerous thing about him is that he is very good at making other people believe his version of the truth." Jonas turned his head and looked at me directly. "You think I will believe him over you?" "I think he has done it before. To people who knew me better than you do." "Grace," his voice was quiet and entirely certain, "I have watched you for 2 months. I have watched you drag yourself up a mountain you had never seen. I have watched you burn food and drop things and cut your hands and start over every single time, without once asking me to feel sorry for you. I have watched you learn to shoot and haul wood and read a storm coming by the way the air smells. He held my gaze. Whatever story he brings up this mountain, I know which one is true. You have been telling it to me every day since you got here. I looked at him. The firelight moved between us. I felt something open up in my chest. Some long, locked room I had stopped believing anyone would want to enter. I wrote to Clara Marlowe, I said. Pete's wife. I sent a letter down with a trader who passed through last month. Told her where the copies of Harcourt's documents are and who to send them to if she stops hearing from me. Something moved through Jonas's expression. Surprise, and beneath it something warmer. You did that on your own? I needed a contingency that did not depend on anyone up here. I paused. I like depending on you, but I needed to not only depend on you. He nodded slowly. Clara is a good woman. She will do what she says. I know. I could tell from the way you described her. I looked back at the fire. I have been taking care of myself for a long time, Jonas. Even when it looked like someone else was taking care of me, I was really doing it myself. I just needed the right ground to stand on. This ground solid enough? I looked at him. Getting there. He held my gaze for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he looked back at the fire. Our shoulders stayed where they were, touching. November moved through like something relentless and certain. The cold deepened. The days shortened to barely enough light to work in. Jonas's trapline was producing well. Fox, mink, 2 beaver. And the work of skinning and stretching and curing was something I had taken on as my particular domain. Working in the lean-to in the mornings with my breath. Making small clouds in the cold air. My hands, which had once been the smooth hands of a woman who had kept books and organized charity dinners, were entirely unrecognizable now. Calloused and scarred and competent. I loved them for it in a way I had not expected. One morning, coming back from the creek with the full water bucket, both hands steady, not a drop lost, I heard the mule making noise from the lean-to. Not the normal disgruntled commentary of an animal that found the world disappointing. Something different. Alert, agitated. I set the bucket down without thinking and looked toward the trail below the clearing. There was nothing there. Just the empty white slope of the mountain and the dark line of trees and the silence that up here was never completely silent. I stood still and listened. The mule had gone quiet again. I picked up the bucket and went inside. But something stayed with me through the day. Some small cold thing at the back of my neck. The sense of something changed. I did not mention it to Jonas. It was probably nothing. But that night while I sewed, and Jonas carved and the fire burned between us and the cabin, held the cold at bay with its solid, reliable walls. I found myself cataloging things. Ammunition on the top shelf. I had counted it myself last week. Jonas's rifle by the door. My own rifle, which I could now load in under a minute. Within arm's reach of my bed. The rope lines strung to the lean-to and the outhouse. The distance from the cabin door to the tree line. I knew this ground. I had earned it the way Jonas said spring had to be earned. Grace, his voice was quiet. I looked up. You are doing it again. Doing what? That thing where you are thinking about something hard and keeping it to yourself. I set down my sewing, looked at him directly. The mule was nervous this morning when I came back from the creek. I did not see anything on the trail. Jonas was very still for a moment. What time? Just after first light. He set down his carving. He did not say it was nothing. I noticed that. He stood and went to the window, and looked out at the dark for a long moment. Then came back and sat down without speaking. "How long until someone coming from Laramie could make it up here?" I asked. "On horseback in this snow?" He thought about it. 4 days from Laramie if pushed hard, less if they had a guide who knew the mountain. "Harcourt would hire a guide," I said. "He is thorough." "Yes," Jonas said. "He would be." We looked at each other across the fire. The wind picked up outside, a long, low sound against the cabin walls, and I felt the cold thing at the back of my neck spread slowly down my spine. "Tomorrow," Jonas said. "I am going to check the lower trail. I will go with you." He started to say something, then stopped. I could see him recalibrating, doing the same thing he had been doing for 2 months, adjusting his instinct to protect me against his growing understanding that I was not someone who needed to be left behind. "All right," he said. I picked up my sewing. My hands were steady. We had time yet. But the feeling in the cabin that night was the feeling of time beginning to run thin, and both of us knew it. We found the tracks. Jonas saw them first. Boot prints in the snow at the lower bend of the trail, where the path narrowed between 2 rock faces before opening back up toward the clearing. 2 sets, maybe 3, coming up and then stopping and then going back down. Whoever had made them had stood there long enough to leave deep impressions, had shifted their weight, had turned around and looked back the way they had come. Not a passing traveler. Someone deciding something. Jonas crouched over the tracks for a long moment, without speaking, stood behind him, my rifle in my watching the trees. "How old?" I asked. "Yesterday, before the wind picked up. So before midday he straightened. 2 men, one of them heavier, wider boot. He looked down the trail. They went back down." "For now," I said. "For now," he agreed. We stood in the cold quiet, and the understanding settled between us, without needing to be spoken directly. Harcourt's men had found the mountain. They had come up far enough to confirm the location, confirm the access point, and turned back to report. Which meant Edmund Harcourt, wherever he was now, knew exactly where Grace Winters had gone. Jonas looked at me. "We go back up. I need to send word to Pete Marlowe." We moved quickly. Back at the cabin, Jonas wrote a short note to Pete, folded it, put it in his coat pocket. He looked at me before he went out. "Bolt the door. Keep your rifle where you can reach it in under 3 seconds. Do not go outside for anything while I am gone. If you hear horses, do not open the door regardless of what they say. You understand? How long to Pete's and back? 3 hours if nothing goes wrong." "Go," I said. "I will be here." He went. I dropped the bolt, checked my rifle, loaded it fully, set it across the table in front of me. Then I put on water for coffee and sat down and made myself breathe slowly and think clearly. Which was harder than it sounded because my mind kept running ahead to scenarios I could not afford to spend energy on yet. I thought, instead, about what I knew. Harcourt was methodical. He would not come himself until he was certain the legal framework was in place. He would want the appearance of legitimacy, a writ of some kind, possibly a territorial marshal if he could afford one. Which he could. He would bring enough men to make resistance look futile. He would present everything in the language of law and order, because that was his particular genius. Making theft look like recovery. Making abuse look like custody. Making a woman's escape look like a crime. I had watched him do it to other people. I had watched it and been unable to stop it. I had lived with that helplessness for years. I was not helpless now. I was on my own ground, with a rifle I knew how to use, and a man coming back in 3 hours who had said, without poetry or performance, "This is your home and no one is taking you from it." I was still afraid, but it was a clean fear. Not the old suffocating kind. It was the fear that sharpens you, rather than the fear that buries you alive. Jonas was back in 2 hours and 40 minutes. I heard the mule before I heard him. Unbolted the door. Had it open before he reached the porch. "Pete is sending word to the sheriff in Harrow's Crossing," he said, coming inside. "Boyd Garrett. Good man, straight. He will want to know if someone is moving armed men through his territory. Will he help us? He will enforce the law. Whether that helps us depends on what papers Harcourt has." He poured himself coffee, stood at the stove drinking it, thinking. "You said you sent the copies of the documents to the lawyer in Chicago last month. He has them and knows what to do with them. I told Pete to have Clara write to that lawyer today. We need that in motion before Harcourt gets here, not after." He looked at me. "How long do we have?" "Weather is bad enough that they will not come in force before it breaks some. 4 days, maybe 5. He set down the cup. "I want to do something, and I need you to hear me out before you argue with me. I am listening. The trail up here has one bad point. About 1.5 miles down, there is an overhang. Granite shelf 30 feet wide, sits above a bottleneck in the path. It has been cracking for 2 winters. I have watched it. One good charge at the base and it comes down." He held my gaze. "If we bring that shelf down while they are under it, we end this before it starts." I looked at this man who had just proposed killing multiple people to protect me. "How many men are we talking about?" I asked quietly. "Do not know yet. Enough that we cannot hold them off from the cabin indefinitely." I was quiet for a moment. I thought about what I had been through, what I had survived. I thought about the cold measuring way. Harcourt had stood in my parlor after Thomas's funeral and told me the terms of my own life. I thought about his men in the boarding house hallway, about the sound of the judge's stamp on the fraudulent writ, about the night I had run through the dark alley with Thomas's papers stuffed inside my coat and terror, so complete it had its own sound. "Show me," I said. We spent the next 3 days preparing, working in the cold with a focus that left no room for fear. Jonas had black powder from the previous winter. He had used it for clearing stumps on the north slope. He packed charges into cloth bags with the careful, deliberate hands of a man who had handled explosives before and had enormous respect for what they could do. He showed me exactly where they would be placed, the fuse line, the timing, the position we would take behind a boulder that gave us cover, and a clear view of the trail. I learned every part of it. I did not just observe. I asked questions until I understood not just what to do, but why. So that if something happened to Jonas, I could do any part of it myself. On the second evening, after we had set the charges and run the fuse line and come back to the cabin, we sat by the fire. I looked at my hands for a long time without speaking. "Jonas, let me have the silence." "I need to tell you the rest of it," I said finally. All right. My husband was not a good man. I do not mean he was cruel. He was not. Not the way Harcourt is cruel. But he was weak. And his weakness had a cost that other people paid. I looked at the fire. He borrowed money he knew he could not repay. He signed agreements he knew were crooked. He told himself it would all work out the way weak men do. And it did not work out. And when it fell apart, he was already gone. and I was the one sitting in the wreckage. I paused. I did not grieve him the way a wife is supposed to. I was too busy figuring out how to survive what he had left behind. And I have felt guilty about that ever since. Jonas said nothing for a moment. Then a man creates a disaster and leaves. A woman lives in it. And somehow the woman is the one who apologizes. He looked at me steadily. That is not guilt. That is just what they taught you to call it. I felt something loosen behind my sternum. You sound like you have thought about this. I have watched it. His voice was quiet, growing up. My mother. Different situation, same principle. I did not push. I waited. My father was not a hard man, Jonas said finally. But he disappeared into himself sometimes. Weeks at a time after the war. Could not get out of bed. Could not work. And my mother carried everything during those times. The farm, the children, the money, everything. And she never once said a word about it. That was not kind. He turned a piece of wood in his hands. I spent years being angry at my father for putting that on her. Then I spent more years understanding that he was not choosing it. Then I spent even more years understanding that both of those things could be true at once. That he was not choosing it, and that it still was not right. He looked at the fire. Took me a long time to sort out that loving someone and resenting what they cost. You are not mutually exclusive. I looked at him. Is that why you are up here? So you do not cost anyone anything? He did not answer immediately. Partially. Jonas, I said. You cannot live like you are a burden to be avoided. You are not a burden. You do not know what I am like in winter, the bad ones, the ones that go dark. He looked at me carefully, like he was deciding something. I go somewhere else sometimes, in my head, like my father, not as bad, but the same grain of it. I get very quiet and very far away, and there is nothing to do but wait it out. I held his gaze. And you thought if you were alone, you would only be doing it to yourself. He did not answer, which was answer enough. I am not leaving because you have hard seasons, I said. I have them too. Everyone does. You do not leave a house because winter comes. He looked at me for a long moment when something open and unguarded in his expression that I had never seen from him before. Then he looked away, and I let him. Because I understood about needing to look away sometimes when a thing was too large to hold eye contact with. The fifth day came gray and still, the kind of stillness that on this mountain meant something rather than nothing. I woke with it. Lay in the thin morning light and listened and heard the absence of wind, which after weeks of wind had a presence all its own. I was making coffee when Jonas said, "Today." He had been standing at the window for 10 minutes. "How do you know?" I asked. "Storm broke clean last night. Trail will be passable by mid-morning." He turned from the window, and they have been waiting. I set down the coffee pot. Then we go now. We moved through the early morning with the efficiency of people who had prepared until preparation became reflex. Coats, rifles, ammunition, the fuse materials in a canvas pack on Jonas's back. We went down the trail at a pace that was almost running. My legs knowing this ground now in a way they had not 2 months ago. At the rock shelf, we checked the charges. Everything was as we had left it. Jonas inspected each placement, each connection with slow, careful hands. I watched the trail below. Rifle up, breath making small, even clouds in the cold air. "Good," Jonas said. "Come back to the position." We moved to the boulder 20 yards up and to the side. High enough for cover, close enough for the fuse line to reach. From here, we could see a clean 40-yard stretch of trail directly beneath the overhang. Anyone coming up would walk directly through it. We waited. An hour passed. My legs ached from crouching. I did not move. Jonas heard them before I did. He put his hand on my arm and I went completely still. Then I heard it too. Horses. Multiple horses moving up the trail at a careful pace. The particular sound of shod hooves on frozen rock that carries farther in cold air than you would expect. I counted the sounds. 5, I mouthed. Jonas held up 6 fingers. He had counted 1 more. 6 men. I thought about the rifle on my back, the pistol on my hip that Jonas had insisted I learn to use last month. I thought about my hands and what they knew how to do. I thought about Edmund Harcourt in his expensive coat with his lawyer's eyes and his purchased legal language. And something cold and absolutely clear settled over me like the first good snow. The first rider came into view below the overhang. I did not recognize him. Big man, heavy coat, hired gun wearing the face of hired guns everywhere. The particular blankness of men paid to do someone else's wanting. 3 more behind him in single file where the trail forced it. Then a 5th man, silver hair, fine coat. I recognized him immediately. Gideon Farwell, Edmund Harcourt's lawyer, the man who had stood at my father's funeral and called himself a family friend. The man who had known me since I was a child. My heart stopped. Behind Farwell, on a black horse, Edmund Harcourt himself. I had known he would come. Had known it in the way you know things you have been afraid of. For so long they have become part of your interior landscape. But seeing him here, on this mountain, in this place I had bled for and earned, something in me went very quiet and very hard and very certain. Jonas's hand found my arm, not restraining, steadying. The riders moved under the overhang. First man through, second, third, fourth. Farwell's horse stepping careful on the icy rock. Harcourt himself, moving into the shadow of the granite shelf, glancing up at it with the instinctive wariness of a man who does not like things above him he cannot control. All 6 under the shelf. Jonas looked at me. This was the moment I had to decide. Gideon Farwell was down there, the man who had bounced me on his knee when I was 5 years old, who had written to me after my father died and offered help if I ever needed it. He was also the man who had stood in Harcourt's office and drafted the papers that made it legal to trade me for a debt. I thought about the little girl Jonas had told me about, the 7-year-old who watched her mother die because someone made a decision in 3 seconds. I thought about what it cost to make the hard choice. I thought about what it cost not to. I looked at Jonas. I nodded. He lit the fuse. The world came apart. The first charge went with a sound like God clearing his throat, a crack that I felt in my back teeth and my sternum simultaneously. Then the second. Then the rock shelf, cracking for 2 winters, made a sound I had no previous reference for, a grinding, groaning, tearing sound. And then it simply ceased to be a shelf and became instead a catastrophe. Tons of granite coming down in a roar that swallowed everything else. The screaming of horses, the shouts of men, all of it consumed by the avalanche of rock and snow and mountain coming down on the trail below. The dust cloud hit us where we crouched, cold and thick. I buried my face against Jonas's shoulder and held on and felt the ground shake under my boots for what seemed like a very long time. Then it stopped. The silence after was enormous. I lifted my head. The air was white out with rock dust. I could not, see the trail, could not see anything below us. Jonas stood. I stood with him. We went down together. The trail was gone. In its place was a wall of rubble 20 feet high. Granite blocks and shattered timber and snow all mixed together and still settling. Small rocks skittering and finding their resting places. The sounds were wrong, creaking, shifting, the occasional sharp crack of a rock adjusting its position. Nothing human. Jonas moved along the edge of the debris with his rifle up. I flanked him on the left. Washati Fall's far edge where the slide had pushed some material out sideways. Looking for movement, any movement, and what I found instead was a sound. A groan, low and pained, from somewhere beneath a half-buried timber. I looked at Jonas. He nodded. We moved toward it, cleared debris with controlled efficiency until a hand appeared, then an arm, then Gideon Farwell's silver head, cut at the temple. One shoulder clearly wrong, but alive, breathing. His eyes found me with the confused, disoriented look of a man whose entire understanding of the situation had just been physically rearranged. "Grace," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Grace Adelaide." I crouched in front of him. "Where is Harcourt?" I asked. His eyes moved toward the deeper rubble. I stood, looked at the wall of fallen rock. Jonas and I searched for 8 minutes that felt much longer. I found him near the far edge, where the slide's momentum had carried lighter debris further down the slope. He was partially visible. Expensive coat dark with blood, right hand extended, as if he had been reaching for something. At the moment the mountain came down, his eyes were open. They held expression left to read. I stood over him for a long moment. Edmund Harcourt had stood in my parlor and told me what I was worth, had filed papers with bought judges, had sent men to track me across a territory, had come up this mountain with 6 hired guns to drag me back to a life I had nearly died escaping. And the mountain had answered. I reached into my coat pocket, took out the folded document I had been carrying since the first morning I had seen the boot tracks. The letter I had written, precise and detailed, describing Harcourt's fraud and what I knew and where the evidence could be found. I had written it in case I did not survive long enough to tell anyone myself. I looked at it for a moment. Then I tucked it back into my pocket. I would still need it, but I would deliver it myself. Standing up. In my own voice, Jonas came to stand beside me. "The lawyer is alive," he said quietly. "I know. He will need to get down the mountain. I know." I looked at the rubble one more time, at this place where Edmund Harcourt had ended, and where I had not. "We will help him down," I said. "And then we will go to Harrow's Crossing. And we will talk to Boyd Garrett. And we will tell him exactly what happened and exactly why." "Together," Jonas said. "Together," I said. I started back up the trail toward the cabin without looking back at the slide. My hands were steady at my sides. The cold morning air went into my lungs clean and sharp and entirely real. I was alive, completely and undeniably alive on my own ground, on my own terms, and no one in this world had the power to change that anymore. The price of my freedom had been high, but I had paid it myself, and I would do it again. Getting Gideon Farwell down the mountain took most of the day. The man had a broken collarbone and 2 cracked ribs and a gash above his ear that had bled considerably before I packed it with strips torn from my underskirt and bound it tight with rope. He could not ride. We fashioned a drag sled from timber and rope. Jonas pulled it while I walked beside Farwell. and made sure he did not lose consciousness, which he tried to do 3 times on the steepest sections of the trail. He did not speak much. When he did, his voice was stripped of the careful legal architecture he usually hid behind. What came through underneath was something smaller and more human than I had ever heard from him. "He told me you had stolen property," Farwell said at one point, staring up at the sky from the sled. "Said you were unstable, that you had had some kind of episode after your husband died." I walked beside him without answering. "I believed him," Farwell said. "I want you to know that I believed him. I am not certain it changes anything, but I want you to know. It does not change anything," I said. "But I hear you." We reached Harrow's Crossing as the last light was leaving the sky. The town came out to meet us the way small towns do when something has happened that exceeds the ordinary scale of events. Dutch was there, the gap-toothed man whose cheek I had come close to slapping on my first day, stood back from the crowd and said nothing. Mrs. Pryor from the boarding house, a dozen others, who had all in their various ways written Grace Winters off as someone who would not last the season. Sheriff Boyd Garrett was waiting at the edge of the crowd with his arms crossed and his face carrying the particular expression of a man who has been warned something is coming and is not entirely pleased to find out. The warning was accurate. "Callahan," he said. "Boyd." Garrett looked at Farwell on the sled, at the blood on my coat, at the rifle I was still carrying with the automatic ease of someone who had stopped thinking of it as a separate object. He looked at all of it for a long moment. "I am going to need a full account," he said. "You will get one," Jonas said. "But first this man needs a doctor." Farwell was carried to the doctor's house on the far end of Main Street. Jonas and I went to the sheriff's office. We sat across from Boyd Garrett at his desk and we told him everything. I spoke most of it. I had decided on the trail down that I was not going to let Jonas carry this for me, was not going to sit small and let the man speak on my behalf. This was my account. I delivered it. Garrett listened without interrupting. He had a legal pad in front of him, and he wrote as I talked, his handwriting small and precise. When I finished, he looked at his notes for a moment. Then he looked at me. "You have documentation," he said, "the fraud, the bribes, the false filings, copies of all of it. With William Tate, a lawyer in Chicago. He should have received Clara Marlowe's letter by now telling him to proceed." I reached into my coat and put the letter I had written on his desk. "And that, written in your hand?" "Yes." "Notarized by a justice of the peace in Laramie before I came up here, describing everything I know and where the originals can be found." Garrett looked at the letter without touching it. "You had this on you today?" "Since the morning I saw the boot prints on the trail. I needed someone to have the truth, even if I did not survive to tell it." A silence sat in the room. Garrett looked at the letter, then at me, and something in his expression shifted from the careful neutrality of a lawman. Hearing a story to something more personal. "Harcourt filed a territorial writ," Garrett said. "Came through my office 3 days ago. Claimed you had stolen from the estate of your deceased husband and fled to evade prosecution." He paused. "I was going to serve it." "I know," I said. "A writ is a writ. I do not have the authority to simply ignore it." "Boyd." Jonas's voice was quiet. "She knows how it works. Tell her what happens now." Garrett leaned back. He picked up the letter I had put on his desk, looked at it, set it back down. "The man who filed the writ is dead." That does not dissolve the legal question automatically, but it changes the practical landscape considerably. He tapped the letter. With this documentation, and the copies in Chicago, and a corroborating account from a surviving member of the party, which Farwell is whether he cooperates or not, the picture that gets painted is considerably different from the one Harcourt was selling. He looked at me directly. I am not a judge, and this is not a courthouse. But in my assessment, what you did was defend yourself and your home from armed men who came with documented intent to remove you by force. That is a straight line to self-defense under territorial law. I breathed. Just breathed for a moment. There will be questions, Garrett continued. From outside this territory, Harcourt had connections. People will want to know what happened to him and to 5 hired men on a Wyoming mountain. It will not be simple and it will not be fast. He stood. But I will tell you what I told Pete Marlowe when he rode in 2 days ago. I have been the law in this county for 11 years, and I know the difference between a crime and a consequence. He walked us to the door, then stopped. Mrs. Winters, he said. I turned. Garrett looked at me with the straightforward respect of a man who did not hand it out easily. You did good, he said simply. Holding that mountain. I nodded once. That was enough. Mrs. Pryor gave us the large room at the end of the hall without being asked. She brought up soup and bread without being asked either. She did not say anything beyond, eat, both of you, which was exactly the right amount of words for the situation. I sat on the edge of the bed and ate, and felt the day moving through my body in waves. The adrenaline leaving in stages like water draining from a vessel. Jonas sat across from me in the room's one chair. He ate slowly and watched me. Say something, I said. What do you want me to say? I do not know, something real. He set down his bowl, looked at me with those eyes I had learned to read. The way I had learned to read the stove and the clouds and the quality of morning light. You scared me today, he said. Not because I did not think you could handle it. Because I kept thinking about what it would have cost if it had gone differently. And I did not like what that thought did to me. I looked at him. What did it do to you? Made me understand how much I have got to lose. He said it plainly, without decoration. I am not built for saying things like that, but I am trying to be honest with you, and that is the honest thing. I set down my own bowl, crossed the room and sat on the arm of his chair, which was too small for 2 people. I did not care. I put my hand against the side of his face, rough palm against the jaw I had been watching for months. He went very still. I am here, I said. I came down the mountain. I am right here. His hand came up and covered mine. His eyes closed briefly, the way a person closes their eyes when something they have been holding very tight finally gets to rest. I know, he said. Then hold on to that, I said. Whatever comes next. Hearings, lawyers, people asking questions. Hold on to that. He turned his head and pressed his lips to my palm. Just briefly. Just once. And it was the most unguarded thing I had ever seen him do. We stayed like that for a while, in that small room, in that small town, with the sounds of Harrow's Crossing moving past the window, and the smell of wood smoke coming in from somewhere, and both of us still alive, which was not something I had been certain of that morning. The next 3 days were slow and procedural, in the way that the aftermath of violent things often is. Meetings in Garrett's office. A written deposition from Farwell, who turned out, stripped of Harcourt's money and influence, to be a man of considerably more conscience than his professional record suggested. He cooperated fully, confirmed the fraud, confirmed the writ had been obtained through a compromised judge, confirmed that Harcourt had come to Wyoming knowing exactly what he intended, and not caring much about the legal justification. He said in his careful lawyer's language that Edmund Harcourt had described me as property to be recovered, had used that word deliberately and without any apparent awareness of its inadequacy. Garrett wired Chicago and Philadelphia. Responses came back within 2 days, confirming that the documents I had sent through Clara Marlowe had arrived, had been reviewed by competent legal minds, and had already been passed to federal authorities with jurisdiction over the financial crimes Harcourt had committed. The investigation was open. The Harcourt estate was frozen pending review. I read the telegram sitting at the table in Mrs. Pryor's dining room with Jonas beside me and Pete and Clara Marlowe across from me. Clara had come down from the mountain the previous day, a small, decisive woman with red hands and sharp eyes who had taken one look at me and said, "I knew you would make it," with the certainty of someone stating the weather. I had liked her immediately and completely. I put the telegram down on the table. "It is enough," I said. "The evidence is enough. They do not need my testimony to proceed." Clara reached across and covered my hand with hers. "You are free," she said. I looked at the telegram, looked at Jonas beside me, looked at Pete Marlowe, who had ridden down at first light when he heard what had happened, looked at Clara, who had sent those documents to Chicago without hesitation and without asking for anything in return. I looked at my own hands, scarred and calloused and entirely unrecognizable from what they had been 4 months ago. "I know," I said, and I felt it, not as a sudden release but as a settling. The way a foundation settles when it is finally finished shifting and becomes something you can build on. On the 4th morning, we went back up the mountain. We did not discuss it as a decision. We simply both woke early and packed our things, and Jonas settled the bill with Mrs. Pryor, who pressed a jar of preserved plums into my hands and said, "For the winter, do not tell me you cannot use them." The climb was different from the first time in every way. My legs knew the trail. My lungs knew the altitude. I did not fall behind. I did not stop. I moved up through the cold morning air with Jonas at my side. Not ahead of me, not behind me, beside me. And the mule followed with its perpetual expression of cosmic disappointment. The cabin looked smaller than I expected, from the top of the last switchback, and more damaged than I had let myself think about during the days in town. The porch still showed scorch marks from where we had dragged fire materials out during preparation. One shutter had pulled loose in the last wind. There were things inside I knew needed attention. I would get to all of it. I would get to it, methodically and without rushing the way I had learned to approach everything on this mountain. Jonas unlocked the door and pushed it open. We went in together, and the smell of the cabin hit me. Wood smoke and old leather, and the particular cold storage smell of dried food and pine. And I felt it arrive in my chest the way a word arrives when you have been searching for it. Home. I set my pack on the table and turned around. Jonas was watching me from just inside the door. The morning light came through the window and caught the planes of his face, and I looked at him for a moment. The way you look at something you are not afraid of losing anymore, which is different from the way you looked at it when you were. "We need to fix the shutter before tonight," I said. I know, and I want to check the food stores. We burned through more than I expected with the extra preparation. We have got enough. Claire sent provisions with Pete before they came down. I checked the pack before we left. Good. I took off my coat, hung it on the peg beside his. 2 coats hanging side by side. Jonas did not move from the doorway immediately. He stood there looking at me with the particular expression I had learned to recognize over months of close attention. Not quite a smile, but the thing that lived in the same neighborhood. Grace, he said. I looked at him. When spring comes and the trail opens up proper, I want to take you to Harrow's Crossing, to the church, and do this right. He held my gaze, and there was nothing uncertain in it, nothing hedged. Not because the law requires it, because I want to stand in front of people and say out loud what is true. I looked at this man who had taken me in and taught me to carry water and load a rifle and read a storm and trust again. This man who had told me hard truths and given me space and stood beside me on a cold mountainside while the world came down. This man who was not romantic in the conventional sense, and was not soft, and was not easy, but was honest in the way that mattered most. Honest about who he was and what he felt and what he intended. Yes, I said, simply and completely, in spring. He nodded once. He reached out and straightened the collar of my work dress. Just briefly. Just a small domestic gesture. But I felt it like a declaration. Then he went to look at the shutter. I built the fire. I built it the right way. The way I had learned. Kindling positioned for airflow. The damper turned to the quarter that held heat without choking. The first match catching, and the fire taking hold with quiet confidence. I filled the coffee pot from the bucket, that still had enough in it from before. I moved through the cabin, checking things with the automatic inventory of someone who understood that this place required daily tending and returned daily care in kind. Outside, I could hear Jonas working on the shutter, the sound of the hammer, measured and certain. The sound of a man doing work he knew how to do in a place he had chosen to be. I sat down at the table and put my hands flat on its surface. I looked at the grain of the wood, the coffee ring left by 100 mornings, the small scar near the edge from the ceramic pot I had dropped on my worst day. This table, this room, this ground. I thought about the woman who had slapped a stranger's face on a dusty street and climbed a mountain on bad legs and burned the bread and dropped the soup and learned to shoot and fought off men who came to take everything from her. And I thought about how that woman and the woman sitting here missile were the same woman. Which was the thing that mattered most. Not transformed, not rescued, not remade into something more acceptable or more convenient or more comfortable for anyone else to look at. Just revealed. The way rock is revealed when water wears everything soft away. What was always underneath finally visible. The fire caught fully, and the cabin began to warm, and the coffee started to work toward ready. And I sat at my own table in my own home, on my own mountain, with everything I had fought for around me, and everything I had been afraid of behind me, and the whole long certain future of my choosing still ahead. I had come to this mountain with nothing but fear and stolen evidence and a name I had borrowed to escape with. I had bled into this ground and learned its language and earned its winter and defended it with my own hands. I had faced the man who believed he owned me, and I had watched the mountain answer for me. and I had stood afterward in the cold, clear air and felt the weight of years of captivity lift from my shoulders like snow melt, running off in spring. No court document had freed me. No man had rescued me. No circumstance had simply turned in my favor. I had done it, every hard inch of it myself. The shutter banged into place outside. The hammer struck 3 more times, solid and final. The cabin held the cold out with the confidence of good construction. The coffee began to smell like coffee. I was not the woman they had laughed at on that street in September. I was not the soft city wife who could not haul water or start a fire or survive a mountain winter. I was not Edmund Harcourt's property, or my father's burden, or Thomas Winters's mistake, or any man's definition of what a woman could be worth. I was the woman who had walked up this mountain when every person in that town expected me to fail. I was the woman who had learned to shoot and haul and build and fight. I was the woman who had stood over the man who hunted me with a steady hand and a clear conscience, and not one drop of apology for choosing to live. I was home. I was free. I was exactly who I had always been in the one place on earth that had been willing to find out, and I was never, for the rest of my long life on that mountain, going to be anything less.